On today's Jerusalem Dateline, Prime Minister Netanyahu stands against pressure for a two-state solution. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo visits Israel in a show of solidarity and warns about the importance of deterrence in the Middle East. Plus, analysis about this moment in Israel's battle for the right to exist, and anti-Semitism in cyberspace and how one young woman's Israeli startup tracks it and fights it. All this and more coming up in this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl. As fighting escalates in Gaza and along Israel's northern border, the U.S. and its Arab partners are working on a blueprint with a firm timeline for establishing a Palestinian state if a Gaza ceasefire takes effect. However, that's a non-starter for Israel. After a call with President Biden, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu again rejected the idea of recognizing a Palestinian state. Posting on X, formerly known as Twitter, he summed up his opposition in two sentences. Israel categorically rejects international dictates regarding a permanent settlement with the Palestinians. Such an arrangement will be reached only through direct negotiations between the parties without preconditions. Israel will continue to oppose the unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state. Such recognition in the wake of the October 7th massacre would give a huge reward to unprecedented terrorism and prevent any future peace settlement. The plan would include many steps rejected by Israel in the past, including evacuating many communities in the biblical lands of Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank, along with a Palestinian capital in eastern Jerusalem and a combined government for the West Bank and Gaza. Israeli government spokesman Avi Hyman said, "It's not time to speak about the day after the war ends."
Now is not the time to be speaking about gifts for the Palestinian people at a time when the Palestinian Authority themselves have yet to even condemn the October 7th massacre. Now is the time for victory. Total victory against Hamas. All discussions of the day after Hamas will be had the day after Hamas.
And today in southern Israel, a terrorist attack at a bus station, a shooter killing 2 and wounding 4 others before being stopped. Meanwhile, Israel criticized a United Nations official who told Sky News that despite its acts of terror, Hamas is not a terror organization, which is a position held by the UN.
I think it's very difficult. And as you say, I've worked with many different terrorist and insurgent groups. Hamas is not a terrorist group for us, of course, as you know. It's a political movement.
Posting on X, Israel's UN ambassador Gilad Erdan blasted Griffiths, saying, "You are no humanitarian. Sadly, you are a terror collaborator." Also, Netanyahu and other senior Israeli officials met with CIA Director William Burns in Tel Aviv to discuss talks for the release of the hostages. The Prime Minister earlier refused to send a delegation to Cairo for talks on Thursday until Hamas lessened its demands. Families of the hostages chained themselves together at the entrance to the Defense Ministry, calling for the War Cabinet to send a delegation to Cairo. And in Gaza, IDF spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari explained Israel's military mission in the Nasser hospital in Gaza, where Israeli intelligence believed bodies and hostages were being held.
According to the information we have collected, I can now share some of the terrorists who took part in the massacre of October 7th. They were found by our forces inside the Nasser hospital complex. If it weren't for Hamas starting this war, taking our hostages and hiding in the hospital, we wouldn't need to be in the hospital in the first place. Hamas started this war. Israel will end this war.
According to former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Israel must do what it needs to do to finish Hamas and bring its hostages home, and the American people will back them up. CBN News joined Pompeo on part of his solidarity trip to witness the places devastated by Hamas on October 7th. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and his wife Susan have been to Israel many times, but this trip is much different.
This is sacred ground. To see the pictures of these young people reminds my wife and me, Susan, so much of our family and the families who lost loved ones here. And we pray for the souls of those lost and the families who remember them. It is also, as you walk this field, never far from my mind that not far from where we are standing, there are hostages still being held.
For those of us, of which there are millions, who are so crushed, were so crushed on October 7th and continue to be and continue to stand with you, we feel helpless. It's hard for us to know how to convey, especially to those personally affected, but to Jews everywhere, how much we care.
Pompeo and his wife visited the site of the Nova Music Festival, where more than 300 Israelis were murdered and dozens of others kidnapped into Gaza. He came to stand with Israel at this tough time, to honor the memory of those who were killed and to stand with the families of the hostages.
I've been amazed by the resilience of the Israeli people, although frankly not surprised. Continue to be amazed by that. And then, whenever you see the families who've lost loved ones or the families who still continue to have their loved ones held inside of Gaza, it reminds you of the sense of responsibility to defeat these adversaries, to actually win.
In an interview with CBN News, Pompeo says Israel should have the support of the American people.
But I hope the message that I can leave with the Israeli people is that the United States, writ large, supports what Israel is doing and supports the decisions that Israeli leadership is making to do what it needs to do.
He believes Israel is prepared to pay a great price for the return of the hostages, but he understands the terrible dilemma its leaders face.
They will face it in the right way. As for the mechanics of it, I'm also confident Israel will ensure that they get those people home, but won't sacrifice the risk that there'll be more hostages and more dead Israelis. That would be unforgivable.
Knesset member Ambassador Danny Danon accompanied the Pompeos on this visit.
I'm grateful for Secretary Pompeo and his wife Susan for being here with us, and I know it will change his life. So I know it's not easy for them, it's not easy for us, but it is a must to see the atrocities that took place here.
They visited Kfar Aza, one of the hardest hit communities near the Gaza Strip.
So we can see that this is the high rises. That's already downtown Gaza. That's Gaza City itself. The north from where we are, that's already Jabalia. The other neighborhood over here to my left is Al Sujaiya. Hamas has turned these locations into strongholds.
IDF spokesman Major Liad Diamond spoke of a photographer who lived in Kfar Aza. He snapped a photo of paragliders landing in his community and was killed along with his wife. They met the brother of twins Gali and Ziv Berman, both kidnapped from the kibbutz and now held hostage by Hamas.
And we still don't know where they are, in what condition they are. We know from the first deal, the release hostages in the first deal, they saw them, they were alive. It was more than 70 days ago.
And they also met Shimon, the father of Sivan, who was murdered along with her partner. In the couple's apartment turned into a memorial, the Pompeos left a note. At the Nova Festival Memorial, Susan Pompeo shared her thoughts.
Everything is horrific and it's impossible to describe, but I really think where we're standing on the beautiful grounds of what was a fun, fabulous, big adventure of music, a festival for all these darling young people, it just kills you because behind me are the photos and the candles and the flowers memorializing their lives.
She says it's important that the world doesn't just move on.
The news cycles can't go on. We can't let it just turn to the next horrible thing that happens, the next big weather event or whatever it might be. We cannot do this. Frankly, just from a selfish perspective, because we could be next. And so we must not turn away.
Pompeo says it's important at the end that Israel is able to provide security for its own people.
The most important thing is that Israel is confident that it has deterred their adversaries, and something like what happened in this place is, I always hesitate to say can never happen again, but they have substantially reduced the risk of something like this ever happen again.
Up next, the importance of keeping enemies intimidated. More from former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on the U.S. response to terror attacks in the Red Sea. As political analysts have long said, the perception of strength is critical in keeping enemies at bay in the Middle East. With Iran stirring up proxies across the region, the U.S. has become a target. Mike Pompeo addressed this in our interview. Take a look. Former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says Americans are being attacked in the Middle East due to a loss of deterrence.
The enemy is emboldened when you no longer have convinced them that there'll be a true cost to pay. And whatever we have done in response so far, whatever one thinks about those responses, it is demonstrably true that they've not been sufficient, that they have not been adequate yet to deter the Iranian regime from continuing to threaten our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, and we've got to get that back.
Pompeo told CBN News he'll leave the how-to up to others, but he knows it can be done.
But I know how to do it because we did it for 4 years. We were able to demonstrate to the Iranians that there was a price to pay if you put Americans at risk.
During a solidarity visit to Israel, Pompeo held a press conference at the site of the Nova Music Festival, where Hamas murdered hundreds of young people and kidnapped dozens of others into Gaza during the October 7th massacre.
There is power behind the forces who came across these fence lines in Gaza. And I think, too, today of the struggles still in the north with Hezbollah. We should be mindful that what happened on October 7th is a symptom of the challenge that the Islamic Republic of Iran brings.
In November, Yemen's Iranian-backed Houthi rebels began attacking American and other ships in the international shipping route in the Red Sea, in revenge, they say, for Israel's military operation in Gaza. The U.S. and U.K. have struck multiple Houthi targets in Yemen, but the trouble has not stopped. And now, according to some media reports, the UAE and other Arab states want to restrict the U.S. from launching retaliatory strikes. Pompeo says the world can't forget that Iran is behind it all.
The world needs to remember that whether it's what's taking place in the Red Sea today or what's happening, the fights that are going to occur around Rafah, that in the background is the Iranian leadership, it is Iranian training, it is Iranian money. And so the responsibility to get this right will inevitably require lots of sustained effort against that true threat.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, the Nova Music Festival Memorial, Israel. Deadly foes are attacking Israel from all sides right now. Their goal is to wipe the tiny Jewish nation off the face of the earth. But as TBN News analyst Erik Stakelbeck tells our Paul Strand, Israel Unleashed could put an end to all these threats.
Erik, here's my first question for you. Imagine you've got nothing to worry about from the rest of the world. You're Israel, and you don't have to worry about the UN or the Biden administration. What would you do to solve the problem of Hezbollah, Hamas, all these proxies Iran has, and maybe Iran itself, so you could finally have peace?
Paul, first of all, great to be with you in Jerusalem. Second of all, you make a great point. If Israel wasn't fighting with one arm tied behind its back, what I would do in Israel's shoes, number one, the clear answer is to crush Hamas decisively. I mean, so that Hamas, there's no question, is never alive to attack Israel ever again. That's number one. Settle things in Gaza once and for all. Number two, Hezbollah, Paul, which I believe is the greater threat in this. Not only push Hezbollah back a few miles from the border, but decisively crush Hezbollah. Again, this is no inhibitions, and Israel's not handcuffed by the world, the so-called international community. I think you need to wipe Hamas and Hezbollah off the map. And,
and 150,000 missiles that Hezbollah has,
That's
many of them
right.
precision-guided. They could come here and wipe Jerusalem right off the face of the earth.
And the caveat there is, look, Israel is the most humane fighting force in the world, I believe. The Israelis go to extraordinary lengths to avoid any civilian casualties. So this wouldn't be scorched earth complete. Israel would do it with tact and surgically, but the end game, Paul, would need to be the complete elimination of these Iran-backed terror organizations and also consequences for the Iranian regime, Paul, because look, that's the head of the snake in Tehran, and kind of the tentacles of the regime stretch throughout the region. At the end of the day, there needs to be consequences in Iran. If I'm Israel, with, again, no, this is a hypothetical scenario. If Israel had no limitations, obviously you'd start by eliminating Iran's nuclear weapons program, and you would pray that the Iranian people can overthrow that wicked regime once and for all.
Okay, now, second question. Saudi Arabia, right now they're kicking up about having joining the Abraham Accords. They say there must be a Palestinian state. So we're down on that maybe. But the idea of Israel and Saudi Arabia, or rapprochement, peace between these two gigantic entities of the Middle East, how big would that deal be? How much, does the world need to see that happen, those two countries coming together and having peace?
Paul, I interviewed Prime Minister Netanyahu about this a few months ago. He called it a quantum leap. I mean, this would be a game changer. It would be a world changer, a massive historical event for Israel, the world's one and only Jewish state, to make peace with the nation that was the birthplace of Islam, home to Mecca and Medina, Saudi Arabia. This would be literally earth-shaking. And I think it can happen, Paul. I do. I mean, on hold right now, obviously. And remember, in the run-up to the October 7th massacre, there was so much talk that Israel and Saudi Arabia were very close. And I believe one of the reasons Iran gave the green light for October 7th was to put a stop to that Israel-Saudi potential normalization. But now we're a few months in, and the Saudis are saying, look, this is still on the table. Now, the caveat there, Paul, is the world is pushing for a Palestinian state. The Biden administration is saying to Israel, look, you can have normalization with Saudi Arabia, but you have to recognize a Palestinian state. Israel's not going to go down that road, but I believe even without that, the Saudis are willing to come to the table. Two reasons, Paul, in particular. Number one, Iran. That Iran threat, it's not only a threat to Israel, it's a threat to all of those Sunni Arab nations as well. And number two, look, Israel is the strong horse in the region, Paul, not only militarily, but economically. I mean, Israel is a scientific, technological powerhouse. There's a lot of reasons for the Saudis to make peace with Israel, but my prayer for Israel is, if they do it, that the price isn't too high. Does Israel have to make a bunch of very dangerous concessions? Right now, there's no consensus for that among the people of Israel, surely. But I think this talk of a Saudi deal is going to kick back into overdrive once again. I think in a broader sense, Paul, it has prophetic implications.
Amen. Yeah, and it could mean not just peace for this region, but maybe peace for much of the world if you could finally just have this conflict over once and for all. Yeah. Erik, thanks so much for joining.
Paul, my pleasure. God bless, brother.
God bless.
Thank you.
Still ahead, battles on the information front and how one Israeli company fights false narratives denying Hamas atrocities. A number of cyber experts claim the war for Israel's survival is literally in our hands. Our phones are now a major weapon in the battle over which narrative we believe.
As Israeli soldiers are fighting in terror tunnels deep under Gaza, another war against Israel rages in cyberspace. Tal Or-Cohen Montemayor launched Cyberwell in 2022 to create a better real-time picture of online anti-Semitism. October 7th was a turning point.
Since October 7th, Cyberwell tracked a massive uptick in online anti-Semitism with a 29,000% increase in Arabic tweets saying hashtag Hitler was right. Post October 7th, I think something changed and it became very clear that social media platforms are now a matter of national security. They can be exploited by terror organizations and by foreign governments in times of war. This is now happening for Israel, but it could happen to any Western democracy that found itself in a war or under attack by a terrorist organization.
Hamas documented their atrocities on October 7th, but almost immediately came online denials.
This conspiracy theory is acting in a very similar way and with a very similar purpose to Holocaust denial. But there's a really big difference. Holocaust denial was proliferated by these very extreme groups. If ever people were brought on to be interviewed, they'd be hung out to dry by traditional media.
Social media targets the youth.
What we've seen today is that the younger generation is more pro-Hamas, romanticizing Osama bin Laden, being exposed to pro-Hitler content online. And I think that what we're seeing is a culmination of anti-Western, anti-Semitic content being widely believed by the 30 and under crowd, which are using these platforms sometimes as a major news source and are certainly engaging with content online anywhere from 15 to even 100 hours a week.
Cyberwell produced a video to expose the denial of the Hamas massacres.
You really know what happened on October 7th. You've been lied to. We all have. Palestinians didn't behead babies.
What? How can they even say that?
Yeah, we were there.
Something can never be erased.
Montemayor says anti-Semitism online has real-world consequences.
Talk about foreign policy of the current administration, which is now currently in the process of strong-arming Israel into recognizing a Palestinian state because they saw in the polls that their base is not happy about the current policy of supporting Israel. And I think that social media plays a huge role in that in terms of, again, swaying opinion and also shifting people to be openly hostile against Jewish people and Israel.
Food and friendship. See how CBN partners are providing this and so much more to Israeli senior citizens when we come back. A warm meal, a place to meet your friends, pleasant activities. It sounds great, doesn't it? CBN Israel is helping all this happen for senior citizens in a little city overlooking Nazareth called Nof HaGalil. Throughout the week, 150 elderly people come to the Alma Center. A bus picks them up in the morning. They arrive to a full breakfast followed by a variety of activities from art to lectures, music, gardening, and more. And in keeping up with the times, participants learn how to use computers and apps on their smartphones. Of course, they also have time to socialize and eat a hot meal before they go home. Center Director Miri Koren-Yavich explains more.
We provide the elderly people who arrive here with warmth and love beyond the hot meals. They find here they are not alone. Here we build community. We are a family. We are a home. They get out of their four walls where they are alone watching TV. They can come here and get a different atmosphere, get a chance to relax, to see their friends, eat, enjoy, do sports, music, arts, and crafts. Here, it's all about joy, goodness, and fun for the elderly. The Alma Center is natural medicine for the elderly. Whoever comes to the center forgets a little bit of his sorrows, his illnesses, and problems. He gets to disconnect from the daily grind, his problems, from all the difficulties. The moment they get here, they are with friends and can enjoy all the variety of activities that the center offers. It does good for their hearts and souls.
What a wonderful way to help older Israelis stay mentally healthy and engaged with life. If you want to be a part of CBN's humanitarian work in Israel, go to the cbnisrael.org website and see how you can help. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on social media and access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And please continue to pray for the safety of IDF soldiers, all those caught in harm's way, and for the safe return of all the remaining hostages. And remember, the God who's watching over Israel, and you and me, neither slumbers nor sleeps. I'm Julie Stahl. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.